your host, Riri. Welcome to Reimagining Life from Pain to Purpose, where you'll find a community focused on resilience and perseverance, sharing untold stories of hope and rebuilding while dealing with major life interruption. This podcast is made by and for people in the process of reimagining their lives. We're here to raise the voices of those who often suffer in silence, living with chronic pain and/or disability. This space is for you. We encourage you to get involved. So stick around and let's jump right into the next episode. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Keidra Chaney to the podcast. Keidra is a writer, digital strategist, and accessibility advocate. Her writing and independent scholarship centers on the voices and complex stories of marginalized communities and promotes digital access, equity, and safety for all. Her writing has been featured in Chicago Sun-Times, Paste, Bitch Media, the Organization for Transformative Works, and Uncanny Magazine. Keidra grew up in a family where working towards social justice was part of life. Energized by a passion for creating an equal and fair world, Keidra remains very active with a variety of social justice organizations, in addition to her day job working for the National Network of Abortion Funds. We'll learn from Keidra's journey as a creator, writer, woman of color, and woman with a disability learning to stand up for herself and her own rights. We'll also learn about Keidra's journey with Keratoconus, a disease that causes vision loss, and how she reimagined her life to continue a profession she loves and to keep living life and thriving. One of my favorite quotes from Keidra's work is about how modern culture, particularly in the U.S., doesn't socialize people to normalize chronic illness and disability. We're taught to either push our way through illness or disability to not appear, quote, disruptive to others, or conversely, we make illness or disability the focus of a person's identity. One is either self-sufficient or totally helpless, always ill, or a fighter who has beaten illness. There's little room for what's in between, which includes a lot of people living daily with chronic illness and disability. Let's hear from Keidra herself. Welcome. We're so excited that you're here. I would love if you can give listeners a little perspective about what makes you a reimaginer and what kind of physical and or mental challenges have you been having to deal with?
That's a great question. So I feel like my entire life is about reimagination. I think that, one of the things that comes from being a woman of color in society is that you're kind of, immediately viewed from a particular lens, and you have to, basically try to make a life for yourself in a world that kind of tells you that you don't really deserve to be here. And so I think that for me, I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black disabled woman, and I have, especially within school and work environments, there is always a lot of challenges that kind of come from being the only one in certain environments, not necessarily being seen as like competent or being underestimated in terms of like skill and ability. And so that's always been something that in the back of my mind, just navigating, sexism and racism throughout my life. But then as a kid, I was diagnosed with scoliosis. And I think that was my first introduction to disability and ableism, even though I didn't recognize it as that. At the time, I was 11 years old when I was diagnosed. I had spinal fusion surgery, and I spent about 2 to 3 years recovering from that. And so this was in the mid 80s, so long before current definitions of disability justice were there. And also I was a child, so I wasn't necessarily thinking about my social justice and political identity at that time. But I think, really trying to figure out how to navigate not being able to control my body, feeling like, not knowing my body anymore, not being able to, my mobility was limited, and, I was even more kind of dependent on other people in a way that while my body was still growing, I lost control of it. And it's only as an adult that I really realized that that was my first encounter with like what it means to be disabled in an ableist world and how that intersects with my other identities as a Black woman. And so I feel like a lot of my, life and career has been about confounding expectation, being in environments as a creative, as a writer, as a professional, as just somebody living my life. You kind of move into spaces and somebody says, well, you shouldn't be here. You can't do this. Why are you here? Why do you deserve to be here? And going, yes, I do. Like I deserve to take up this space. I deserve to be here. Even when I don't fully have an understanding of my own changing body, and maybe I don't have the kind of control and understanding of my body that I had at a different point in my life, it's still mine. I have autonomy. I have dignity. And I think like being able to navigate worlds that don't necessarily see your whole humanity. That is what reimagining is for me. And it's a constant, and I think it's a constant part of a lot of people's lives who hold marginalized identities.
Wow. I feel like that was like an entire interview within itself. I mean, that was so awesome the way you included so many aspects about the weight of expectation and having to prove yourself and all these things that just shouldn't be and are, and that you have the awareness of it all and how to move through it is just beautiful that you're able to share that. So thank you. And I'm sure many can relate. Can you tell us a little bit more about your major symptoms, what your life was like before? And I'm referring to the Keratoconus. So what was it like sort of before that started? And then how much did you have to change and adapt when that really sort of forced its way into the picture?
I'm really fuzzy about timelines when it comes to keratoconus because I feel like every time I go, oh, it was 5 to 7 years ago. And then I look back and I'm like, oh my God, it was 10 to 15 years ago. I feel like I've lost track of time. And I've worn glasses for as long as I can remember. So I've always not had the best vision. Mm-hmm. But in my late 20s, early 30s is when there was a point where my glasses just weren't working anymore. And I was like, I cannot see what is going on here. And I'll go to big box eye doctors, but like lens crafters or whatever, and going to those eye doctors. And they were just like, oh, it's just really bad astigmatism. Just, get stronger prescriptions for your glasses. You'll be fine. And I was like, oh my God, I really cannot see, and I am a writer. And also I work in digital strategy and social media and technology. And so, I really need to see. At the time I was working, my boss at the time, whose mom is an eye doctor, and he was, I was complaining about it. And he was like, no, you really need to get that checked out. And so I went to like a real deal ophthalmologist because I think there was a point also where I, like, no matter what I was like, man, my glasses are so blurry and it's like nothing I can do. Like I'm super cleaning them and it's still like super fuzzy. I could just not see the television. Like I could not see anything in the television. It was just like nothing. Yeah. It was just like a block of blur. And I was like, this is really scary. And I thought, like, am I going blind? What's going on? So I went to an ophthalmologist near me. I just started crying because I was just like, I can't see anymore. I don't know what's going on. My glasses aren't working. And she was really great and started to do the proper tests and told me that I had keratoconus, which is an eye disease that basically distorts the shape of the cornea. And so like most corneas, all corneas are usually kind of basketball shaped. Mine are football shaped, so they're very pointy, which makes your vision very blurry. And it can be different levels of severity in terms of how keratoconus works. If you catch it early enough, there are certain procedures that you can do to kind of slow down how it progresses. There's no cure for it currently, but in the most severe cases, it does, require a cornea transplant. It can be very disruptive. And so I feel like for me, the reason why it really became an issue is because of my, career. It started to impact my work. I saw in different cases where I was making mistakes that just, career impacting mistakes or things where I'm like, why couldn't I catch this? And I think that's when the real impact and weight of it is based around my ability to earn a living. Of course it's distressing, but it isn't, that point where I'm like, oh my God, am I going to basically lose my ability to keep a job because I can't see anymore. And I think that that's where a lot of the stress and also a lot of, I think the real stress, to be honest with you, like the diagnosis and the treatment are one thing, but I think the more structural things around it were the most damaging things. So it wasn't like, once I found out, it's like, okay, here's what you need to do. But working at places, not the job that I was at where my boss helped me get diagnosed, but jobs after that where I would ask for accommodations and have basically places not want to give me accommodations or really push back on giving me accommodations that I require, and trying to push me out of jobs because they think that I can't do that. So it's like, oh, well, we don't want to give you a screen magnifier or an extra screen, or we understand that you can't be in places with fluorescent lights because it gives you photophobia, but we don't care. You're going to be in an open office. We're not going to give you large screens. You're just going to have to suck it up and deal with it. And getting a lot of pushback from employers, from HR, when I ask for accommodations. And that, and then, the issue of trying to pay for a lot of the treatment that I have. You have to pay out of pocket. It isn't adequately covered by insurance. And so the disruption in my life,
huge.
The symptoms are one thing, and they are something to deal with. But I think the real disruption came not from the symptoms themselves, but the ableism that comes from structures that don't know how to, deal with somebody who doesn't have full, that just the ableism that comes from saying, oh, you're somebody that is low vision. We're not going to give you the accommodations that you need to basically do what you need to do, or the structures that say, hey, we're not going to cover, give you adequate financial coverage for essential health care. So I feel like for me, the disruption of my disability has a lot more to do with structural issues than with the physical symptoms themselves.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean,
yeah.
So I'm curious, were you able to, I'm not sure how to phrase it with that. I don't want to say force them, because aren't they required to make the accommodations under ADA?
So that's one of the interesting things about the ADA is a lot of folks will reference just call the ADA, which first of all, the ADA is not a place.
Right.
It's the Americans with Disability Act. It's a lot, but people will say that. They're like, well, just call the ADA and they'll do something about it. That's not how it works.
I wish.
Yeah, I truly wish. But yeah, it technically, yes. But as with a lot of, discriminatory practices in, especially in workplaces, it can find ways of making it hard for you to do your job, even if, so for example, in the places that I work, they would say, oh, well, we know that you can't be, under fluorescent light because it gives you photophobia. So like, here's a space for you to do your job for like a couple weeks. And then it's like, well, we really need for you to be in this open office place. It's really better for the team. It's really essential for you to be able to do your job in this particular space. So we're basically going to like roll back this accommodation that you've already asked. And so it's, with a lot of discriminatory practices that are, technically, yes, you can't discriminate against somebody for disability, for race, all that. Workplace culture can find ways of making it hard for you to do your job and say that somehow, we're still technically offering what you need on some level, but you can force somebody, but it's going to require going to a lawyer, suing them, like all these different things that, in many cases is harder than they need to be in order for you to do your job. And so for me, rather than, spending time in places that are basically like a hostile work environment, for me, I decided to just go freelance and accommodate myself. And this was long before the pandemic that I decided that I was going to basically be a freelancer and work remotely so that I can, be sure to provide the accommodations that I need for myself in the workplace that is my office. And, then, I'd been working remotely for about 3 or 4 years before the pandemic hit. So I was already kind of well-versed in like what it means to work remotely. And it was kind of like the person to help guide people through like how to start working remotely. So I think that's one of the hard things about when it comes to accommodations and kind of navigating that place. Like legality can only do so much. Like on paper, you can say, yeah, this is what is required, but there's always ways for people to kind of like skirt what they are required to do and make it difficult for people to, exercise what they need. And so there's, limitations to that, unfortunately. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I became a lot more interested in not just accessibility on a technical level, but disability justice that really says like legality is one way of being able to help advocate for yourself, but like to start looking at like social justice related communities of support and interdependence between different communities and having that be another way that people can get the support they need as disabled and chronically ill people.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like you've really been through a lot and just found ways to manage and handle a lot being thrown at you. I'm really interested in hearing a bit more about the social justice work that you've done and continue to do. Can you tell me, what did it look like when you started getting involved in that? And, what are your main goals or hopes that you're working towards?
Sure. So I grew up in a very social justice oriented family. My mom is a big, worked in the nonprofit sector. So she was a executive director at a domestic violence shelter and did work in housing justice. And so I've always kind of been I will say it's in my DNA, but it's definitely a part of just the way that I grew up. And even the church that we were a part of did a lot of activism and social justice. And so it was just something that has always been a part of my life in some way. And even before I was diagnosed with keratoconus, I did social justice work connected to, I was in independent publishing a magazine called Glamour Magazine that did a lot of activism work in racial justice and it was around Occupy Wall Street and that particular period of time. Okay. And so I did writing and editing and wrote and edited the work of different activists in kind of intersecting social justice movement spaces. And so that was something that was always really interesting for me. And also, my sister was a filmmaker and did documentaries on different issues like reproductive justice and racial justice. And so, like, it's just all over my family, but more specifically around disability justice. Oh, and also I work at the National Network of Abortion Funds doing communications work and digital strategy, but I've also worked at other different nonprofits doing similar communications advocacy work. So it's just part of my life and work.
It's part of who you are, yeah.
Yeah, but more specifically around disability justice, I think, during the earlier days of my vision loss with keratoconus, I really became interested in being able to advocate for myself around accessibility. And what I talked a little bit about before about like how I can advocate for myself and others in order to get the accommodations I need to do my work, but I saw the limitations of that. Even if you have the tools, even if you have the physical things that you need to accommodate for yourself, like the assistive technology that you can help make life a little easier for you, if you are in environment where people are ableist and discriminating against or biased against chronically ill and disabled people, like there's only so much that tools can do or even laws can do. And so it really takes like changing the way that people think, changing, structures. And so I really started to become more interested in disability rights, and then learned a lot more about disability justice, which really, like, disability rights is very much focused on advocating for change through policy. Disability justice really gets into more of an intersectional lens that folds in how racial justice, how LGBTQ justice, how abolition, how environmental justice, how all of these things intersect with each other. And so I was starting to read the work of like Mia Mingus and Alice Wong and these amazing writers and thinkers, Rosemary Garland Thompson, that do a lot of great writing, research, thinking around disability justice and disability studies. And it was something that started to inform the writing that I wanted to do. And the work that I wanted to do, even like my work in reproductive justice, to bring a disability justice lens to that work as well, and how my own identity as a Black woman, as a disabled woman, they intersect with each other. And so it was something that I was really excited to do. I started to get more involved with online there's different hashtags. Twitter's a great place for like disability justice activism and organizing. There's been like CryptoVote, which is a hashtag on Twitter that talks about disability and chronic illness participation in politics. There's Disability So White, which is a hashtag that talks about kind of racial justice within disabled spaces. It was started by Lisa Thompson, who's an amazing thinker on Twitter. And I started to get involved locally with an organization called Disability Lead, which is like a leadership development organization that is now going national, and started to do volunteering and participation in that organization, and even doing some cross-social movement work between reproductive justice and disability justice at places called like Advocates for Youth, which is an organization that I've done some disability justice training for youth that are doing like reproductive education work, and how to intersect disability justice with like sex education and reproductive rights and all of that. And so really, like for me, being able to pull these different worlds together is really important to me, because so many of us do hold differing identities and different points of marginalization. And there's so many commonalities between social justice movements in terms of like bodily autonomy and like interdependence within communities and self-determination. And so like for all of these, for me, like I see those different like intersections and connections. And so in many cases, people kind of work in silos. They work on this issue, not always thinking that it interconnects with other issues. And so I'm very passionate about being able to like pull together these different worlds that are working in many cases for the same thing. Mm-hmm. We're all working for freedom and happiness and liberation for everybody. Yeah. And so, that I feel like that is, when I think about the work that I do, for like job related work, but then also just kind of what I do as a person, that is kind of like my North Star.
Wow. That is awesome. I mean, really, that is just fabulous. I mean, I'd love to dive into all of those topics, but I know we don't have time for that. Wow. But that is really so cool that you're finding ways to bring those together and intertwine them. That is just awesome, really. Thank you for sharing that. So you've covered a lot of ground, and it's really just inspiring because I think it is hard and sort of really probably one of the more difficult things is trying to figure out as a disabled person, someone living with chronic illness, like, how can I make a difference when this huge ableist society has all these structures in place and all of this that's sort of built against my needs? How do I work towards that? And so what you're talking about is, I think, really inspirational in terms of finding places where you can weave things together and work towards what you really want to see. And that's really great.
I feel like one of the things, like, there's so much, and it's a big world and there's so much to do, but I feel like, everybody has something that they can contribute. And even if it feels small, it might be big in that little slice of the world that you're in. Like, being a writer and also like being a musician, I'm somebody that really believes in like creativity and self-expression as like such an important way of like changing people's hearts and minds and connecting with people. And like, sometimes it doesn't need to be something big. And especially, now with so much happening in the world, it's important to be out in the streets, but I don't think that's the only way for people to make a difference. And it's not the only way for people to be able to push that needle. Sometimes it can be one-on-one conversations. It can be, participating online in a hashtag conversation. It can be doing a podcast. It can be, a song or a poem that really kind of, changes somebody's heart and mind. And I think that all these different ways for people, I think about the whole like drops in a bucket mentality that, the small drops in a bucket fill the bucket eventually. And I really believe that. I always think that there are, small ways that, collectively can make a lot of big change. And especially in the ways that people are most comfortable and, can express themselves really authentically through doing a particular kind of work that makes a huge difference. We don't all have to be out doing kind of megaphone type work. And, and I'm not really that kind of person either. Yeah. I'm not somebody that I'm never going to be like at a big rally, with a megaphone going, that's just never been my personality. But, I think there's, a lot of different avenues for folks to do work for social change that don't always look the way that people expect it to.
I think that's a great point and really important for people who are thinking about how can I do something, to have that little voice saying, you can do it in your way. You just have to find the way to do it. That's really cool. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how you're so we've talked a little bit about the social justice, which is this huge piece of like, how do we make real change, in the world and systems and all of that. I'm also interested in hearing, because you also have, then you're also an individual who's had to make her way in a world that isn't so supportive. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the changes that you had to make in your professional life to make your work doable. So I'm thinking about more like accessibility things. And
Yeah.
so we were talking about how you're able to make all these changes, like accessibility type changes, in order to be able to do your work and your professional life.
Yeah. A lot of stuff it took years for me to really kind of learn what I needed. My doctor was great, but my doctor didn't have keratoconus and so didn't understand a lot of the day-to-day of what I needed. And so it took being online really made a huge difference in connecting with keratoconus groups on mostly Facebook. Some on Instagram, were folks that really shared, their own experiences, shared like life hacks and stuff that they needed. And so I learned a lot from other folks who had gone through surgery and had, experimented with different kinds of treatments and lenses. And then, also just talking specifically with folks who had keratoconus who had similar jobs. And they're like, hey, like, how are you navigating? Like, what do you do when you have this issue? And so that's where I learned a lot about assistive technology, and learned about screen magnification and voice to text technology and screen readers. And there's a lot of different technology out there to help blind and low vision people to access the internet and participate online and to get things done. And so I did a lot of personal research after learning from other folks in keratoconus groups about the different types of assistive technology that exists. And then because I'm an overachiever, I went a bit further and got certification in accessibility from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And I mostly did it because when I get obsessed with learning stuff, I just want to learn everything. And so I mostly did it for me. I didn't have any interest in like a career in accessibility necessarily. I just mostly wanted to do it to advocate for myself and to advocate for other folks. But it ended up being something that incorporated into my job at National Network of Abortion Funds, where I'm starting to do accessibility work within my own job in terms of like making sure that website and other content is also accessible as well. But it really, I think that like, for anybody who has vision loss, or even if it's not like severe vision loss, it's just like you need a little extra assistance, or even other disabilities that just require a different type of processing of online content. Technology like screen readers, like voice to text, like all of these things, magnification really can make life so much easier and really take a load off in terms of having to navigate that. And it still wasn't easy. Like I had to learn how to use it. For my particular, for keratoconus, one of the other issues that people don't always talk about is that if you can be more prone to getting photophobia or eye infections or eye irritations based on the kind of contacts you wear, because they're often hard lenses and they're very large. They're almost like implants. And so it makes your eyes very sensitive to dust and smoke and other kind of air changes in which make your eye very irritated. And then if you can't wear the lenses, it means you really can't see. And so, being extra sensitive to like air quality, I have a lot of empathy for folks in New York right now and folks in the West Coast, almost all the time, because air quality can make a huge difference in terms of bad eye day, which means like I'm going to be leaning really hard on my screen reader or voice to text right now because I just can't really see. So like I rely on saline eye washes a lot. Yeah, like eye wipes just to make sure that, that area stays as clean as possible. It's like all of these things are a part of my like daily toolkit in order to be able to function. And I think a lot about, I get really anxious and think a lot about situations like emergency situations. Like I always have to pack a whole bunch of different things in case of an emergency, because if I can't wear my contacts, then my vision is, I can't see. And so that changes my ability to be able to navigate in different places. And so I just have to think about a lot of those things when I am navigating, when I go to different cities, if I travel, different environments that might have a different kind of air quality, indoors or outdoors. There are times where if I am having a bad eye day, I might need help navigating a place at night if I can't see. That's another thing. I have horrible night vision. And so I can't really see. I can't drive. I never learned how to drive anyway, just because I live in Chicago. So I just take public transportation everywhere. But even then, like by the time I was like, hey, maybe I should actually get a driver's license. I can't now because my vision is to the point where I can't. And so I have to think a lot about like, when do I ask folks for help if I need it? And do I have my kind of toolkit of things that I need in order to kind of get through the day? What happens in an emergency if I don't have those things? So I have to make, stockpile what I need just in the off chance that something happens and I don't have access to things. I really get worried about, there was in the middle of the pandemic, there was a rumor about saline solution not being available. And I remember in the Keratoconus group, I was seeing everybody freaking out, like, what happens if we don't have what we need? Like, do we need to start stockpiling this? And so I feel like, a lot of us with chronic illness and think a lot about like, catastrophizing. I think people who aren't chronically ill or disabled are like, why are you being paranoid? And it's like, it's not being paranoid. We're really just thinking about like, if the worst case scenario happens, it's going to be real bad for us. So we're just, we have to make sure we have what we need. It's catastrophizing for self-preservation.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I totally relate to all you're saying. And I don't have the same vision issues, but I also have extreme sensitivity to light, to air, like fluorescent lighting's a no. So we all have things that are many times similar with very different conditions, but we all have to take care of ourselves. These self-care things like are not just luxuries. Like people think of going to a spa and, just relaxing all day, and that would be wonderful. But really what we're talking about is sort of preparing your survival pack and making sure in the worst case scenario of every which and way, you're going to be okay.
Yep.
You were gracious enough to share with me some of the writings and things that you've done since your diagnosis. You created, I think it was a zine. I thought that was so cool.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering, do you know if that's been sort of spread? Have many people seen it or used it? Like, it's such a cool idea. It was like an intro to here's what you might want to know.
Yeah, I feel like within kind of Keratoconus communities, it's been circulated. It also actually had a different life even before I made it into a zine. It was a blog post, and that got shared a lot within Keratoconus communities. And because I like zines and I like that like format a lot, I kind of wanted to make a cute version of it to share with folks. But I know the information in that and in the blog post that it's inspired from, like has been circulated for a few years. Like it actually, I made the zine version of it like several years after the blog post. I think I made the blog post was in like 2017, and I think I did the zine like 2 years ago. So yeah, it's been circulated a bit. I know sometimes I'll see it show up like on Twitter. I'll be like, oh look, it's my blog post. One of the things that I've seen a lot is, especially when you're newly diagnosed, and I think doctors are really important, of course, and very crucial. But like I was saying before, like sometimes doctors don't necessarily know about the day-to-day. And so some of the questions that you have, like a doctor can be like, well, this is technically what you need. And it's like, yeah, but I'm talking about like just being able to get up in the morning and do X, Y, Z. And I think that fear about like, is my life completely over or going to change, or like, and just having somebody say, well, here's what you might want to know, is something that I think it would have saved me a lot of heartache for a couple of years, frankly, if somebody had given me like the zine or that blog post, like when I first was diagnosed. That would have helped me a lot. And so that was the spirit in which I did it.
That's great. I mean, I'm sure it's helped a lot of people. It's really great. Okay. Now we've come to our rapid fire 5 for 5 questions. Please answer honestly and quickly, whatever comes to mind. So the first one is, what's your favorite sound?
Bubbles? Like, I like boink, 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 whatever. Yeah. Whatever that is.
That was a good reenactment sound, I have to say. That was very good. Okay. What's your favorite word?
Yay.
Good choice. Favorite guilty pleasure?
I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I think like if you love something, then you should. But if I'm going to say my favorite guilty pleasure, I will say it is K-pop.
Well, it doesn't have to be called a guilty pleasure. It could just be most enjoyable.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Listening.
Yes.
Okay. What's something that you've learned that you wish other people would understand?
Different doesn't mean bad.
Yeah. So true. And then the last one is, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old version of you?
You are enough as you are.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Also, start playing bass now.
Okay. You play bass?
I do play bass.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Always learning something interesting and new. Okay. So you survived our 5 for 5. No, I'm kidding. No, this has been really great. Do you have anything else you want to add or share with our listeners?
First of all, I just want to say thanks. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you. I've enjoyed chatting. This is one of the great parts of doing this podcast.
I guess, I would just say I love chatting with people, especially about like DJ, about disability justice, and like if people want to reach out, especially when it comes to like making those kind of connections. I have just so much energy and excitement around that, and I always love meeting new people who really want to learn more and kind of dig deep in that together. And so like just got an invitation for folks to reach out if they are listening and want to hear more, talk more, chat more, get connected with other folks, to find me on social media.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll share your social media on our page when we post this as well, so they can get in touch with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and very educational.
Thank you. This has been a delight. You're a wonderful interviewer. So.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Okay, have a great day. Keidra has faced a lot of discrimination, including from employers due to her accessibility requirements. She had to make the brave choice to become a freelance writer so she could make sure her accessibility needs were met and she could safely work from home. That was a huge risk before COVID, when working at a distance was not very popular. She mastered that technique and was a pro by the time COVID hit. Keidra has incredible passion for disability rights, social justice, reproductive rights, and creating a fair and accessible environment. Keidra is able to talk so openly and deeply about her personal struggles with learning to adapt and adjust to her own disability, and how to continue working towards social justice goals. It's a joy to speak with her, and inspiring, as she's such a great example of someone who knows her power and leads by example. Keidra's research and depth of understanding of human nature and the impact of society gives us much to think about. It leaves us questioning, how can we make changes to further accessibility and equal and fair rights? Keidra confronts her challenges head-on. After she was diagnosed with Keratoconus, she dove into researching the condition and connecting with others on a similar journey. Needing to learn about all the tools available to her to help her continue to work, Keidra went the extra mile and became a certified professional in accessibility core competencies from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. She's written numerous articles and pieces helping to educate about keratoconus and hoping to help those recently diagnosed who may be overwhelmed and not sure where to turn for help. Her positive energy and passion in working for these causes is infectious. Keidra would love to hear from you if you want to connect with others working towards social justice, disability justice, and more. You can find how to reach her in this episode's show notes. Thanks for listening to Reimagining Life from Pain to Purpose. We're always interested to hear your feedback and questions. So leave a review and drop us a note at reimagininglifepodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. We hope you'll tune in for the next episode.